Hello and welcome to this week's Elite Audio video. And this week we have been reviewing and testing the Revival Audio Atalante 4s that we launched as a UK premiere at the Bristol Hi-Fi show a few weeks ago. Since we came back, we have been testing them to the point of destruction. Well, when I say the point of destruction, what I really mean is we have been playing some harrowing music, but not in the biblical sense, but music that is demanding and testing, both in terms of how the speakers cope with very dense and complex music, but also different genres and, of course, different amplifiers. To find out how they got on, please stay tuned. All is about to be revealed. So here we are, another week, another video, and this week, as I said in the introduction, we have been testing the Revival Audio Atalante 4 loudspeakers. Many of you will recall that we featured these in our Bristol highlights video, and I have to say that the general impression and the feedback we had at Bristol was exceptional. And that was a very difficult room. So how did they perform with us here at Elite Audio? And more importantly, how did they perform with different types of amplification? Because there are some reviewers that are commenting on the variation that they experienced using different amplification themselves. However, before we get into the true nitty-gritty and the meat of our review, let us first of all start with build quality. So straight off I can tell you these loudspeakers for a retail price of £3,800 really defy logic in terms of the perceived quality. Touching the cabinets and just generally going round the construction of the loudspeakers, they look exceptionally well made, and weighing in at 38 kilograms, these are no lightweight loudspeaker. They are pretty hefty. I've moved them around the showroom quite a few times, and who needs weights for a workout when you've got nice heavy loudspeakers that will give you the equivalent? And of course, your weights in your indoor gym can't sound as good as these do, let me tell you. I love the little fine details on the build, the laser etching, which shows off the Revival Audio logo. The quality of the rear terminals is, I would say, equal to anything else that is currently on the market for that price. And just generally the fit, finish, the construction of the feet at the bottom, and how the drivers are fitted to the cabinet. Every aspect of that, I would say, is easily as good as anything at its price. The walnut veneer, I think, is beautifully done. I think the actual wood grain on the pair we have is exceptionally nice, and again you can see that from the B-roll video footage that we have. So overall, I think if you bought these loudspeakers, your first impressions are going to be exceptionally high. The packaging is very good, so there's a lot of thought that Revival have put into every aspect of the ownership of these in terms of your first impressions. So initial impressions, build quality is excellent. You certainly won't be disappointed when you see them. And again, I think that this reflects that Revival, I think, put more in terms of build quality and the aesthetic than perhaps is available at this price. Many people coming into a room in Bristol thought these were £10,000 plus loudspeakers just on how they looked. So that gives you some kind of initial indication as to the design process, the build quality, and the care and attention to detail that Revival have clearly put into these speakers. So let us move on from build quality and let us look at specification. So one of the first things you'll notice is that these speakers use a 28mm soft dome tweeter. Now, this is a very particularly heavy loudspeaker because it is a ferrite magnet system. But more importantly, and perhaps more interestingly, Revival used their own patented Arid Plus system, which effectively represents anti-reflection inner dome. How this works, it actually absorbs rear directed frequencies with all drivers. You've got sound going forwards and backwards as well. What this filter or anti-reflection inner dome does, it absorbs this backwards coming frequency, meaning that it reduces interference or cross-pattern interference, and of course then reducing distortion, ultimately resulting in a much cleaner and more precise high frequency sound. You will also see that there are two 7-inch bass drivers, and these are of BSC construction, which means basalt sandwich construction. To look at them, they look very much like a carbon fiber composite design. If you look at other manufacturers that use carbon fiber, you can see the aesthetic likeness there. But of course, these are very different. Equally, they use another BSC design in the mid-range, which this time is a 5-inch driver. And overall, these drivers, I think, work extremely well together. The dual 7-inch bass drivers and the two rear ports that you will see on the back of the loudspeaker give really deep bass. I've got to say, you know, in one of the tests that we did, we used an Octave V40 SE, which is only a 40 watt per channel into 4 ohm amplifier, valve amplifier. And it just drove these with ease, I've got to say. But I'm going to come to that more in the sound as we get further into the actual review. I'll bring up the full technical specification on screen. As you can see, it's a fairly efficient loudspeaker, meaning that you don't need a high-powered amplifier. Now, what's interesting about that aspect, and I'll come into that in a bit more detail further on, but one of the reviews that I watched for these speakers, the reviewer suggested that you need something that has got a bit of grunt about it. Now, I'm going to disagree with this here because that's not what we experienced. Now, I don't know if they tested it with a lower powered amplifier or maybe didn't have one that they had available or had access to, but the Octave V40 SE, which is their entry level, it's around about £4,000 valve integrated. As I said, it's 40 watts into 4 ohms. Now, that's not a particularly high powered amplifier, and yet everybody here agreed that that was one of the best sounds that we achieved with the Atalantes, and that's, you know, low powered valves. And I have a suspicion that that is where this pair of loudspeakers sweet spots lie, is being driven by valves. The sound was incredible. So anyway, I'm going to come to the sound very shortly. But in essence, I think these are very well specified loudspeaker. I think some of the technology that is used is exceptional. It uses internally Vanden Hull cabling for its wiring, which I think is a nice touch. It shows that there is some attention being paid to how everything connects. Another aspect of the loudspeaker design is that the crossover was tuned manually, so in other words, by ear. That comes back to the desire and the passion of Revival Audio, not just to rely on some computer-aided suggestion or simple measurements to give you, how they tune the crossover in terms of its overall presentation. And I think that shows. For me personally, I think whoever or the group of people that were involved in the tuning of the crossover did an exceptional job. I think it demonstrates that the human ear at times is a much more precise instrument, certainly in terms of extracting musicality from a device. And what's very interesting about that too, I remember years ago chatting with Noel Keywood of Hi-Fi World when that magazine was still in production. And Noel talked to me about how the review process worked, how part of the process is obviously listening with varying types of music, but also in the lab where they would do very strict measurements and then publish those measurements. And one of the things he said that was quite telling, and this is in my very early years in this industry, he said to me that you can measure something that measures perfectly but sounds terrible. And this is where I think Revival have done something very clever by tuning the crossover manually, trusting what they hear, making adjustments as they go, and listening again, because to me, that shows there is very much a human element taking place within the design of the loudspeaker. And certainly, you know, in the world of computer-aided design, and certainly in photography, we see that with some very inexpensive but high-performing lenses coming out. Music is something entirely different, because how we perceive music, how we interpret music is a very personal experience. And when something really connects, then you know that it's doing something right. So this is where I think this is a very clever part of what Revival have done. If you compare it to other speakers in the Revival range, in the Atalante series, we have the Atalante 3s, which is a very compact stand mount monitor design, and then the Atalante 5s, which I have in my own listening room at home, which is a very large studio monitor style speaker with a 75mm soft dome mid-range that I know a lot of reviewers like. So we see a departure from that design with the 4s, which are very much more, I would say, a traditional style. They are the sort of tall, quite a tall loudspeaker, but with a much narrower cabinet compared to what is perhaps more domestically acceptable. And they do have a different presentation, I have to say, to the 3s and 5s. And I think what I find with the 4s is I think they're a warmer sound. Now, I know again that kind of contradicts other reviews out there, but I think they're warmer, and I think for that reason, I think a lot of people are going to really like how these speakers sound. So we tested them with 3 different amplifiers. We tested them with the 300 watt per channel, the Electric Compagnie AW300 monos that we launched at Bristol 2. We tried them with the Musical Fidelity MAXI, and then finally with the Octave V40 SE valve integrated. And one of the things which I think is very pertinent about these speakers is they do let you hear the difference in nuances within your amplification. So when you make a change in the signal path before the speakers, you are definitely going to hear the change then occurring in the sound that you hear. And that's a great thing, because what we don't want is a loudspeaker that is so, I would say, influential on the final sound that you hear, that when you make these changes elsewhere in the signal path, you don't hear any change whatsoever, because there is too much, I would say, flavour being added by the loudspeaker. So the one thing I'll say straight off is that these speakers don't negatively influence what you do further up the signal path or further back from the speakers in terms of signal. And that's a great thing. It means you can then start to really tune the sound that you like using other means, so cabling, for example, because that has a big impact. So you will definitely, we tried different cables with these, and again, the sonic characteristics were immediately obvious. So with the specification aspect firmly parked, let us get to what is the most important element of any review. How did they sound? One of the first tracks that I tested these with is by Morchiba, and the track is called By the Sea, and I chose this very purposefully, and it actually is a track that I have used many times because there are certain parts of that track that can sound very sibilant, and there is sibilance on some systems, and I really wanted to find out if the Atalante 4s were prone to this, because again, it was a comment that I came across from someone else that had listened to them. And I've used this track on numerous occasions for this very purpose. I call it the sibilance test track. It's a great track, actually. I'd recommend that album. In fact, it's a really good album that it's on. But anyway, so there are parts of this track where sibilance is very noticeable. And what I'll do is I'll bring up on screen the time point in the track so you can try it yourself, where sibilance may or may not be obvious to you in your own system. And I can safely say that on all the amplification that we tried it with, there was no over, I would say, accentuation of the sibilance that I know is in this track. In fact, if anything, it was a non-issue. I wasn't really aware of it, and immediately that put me at ease with that particular track in itself. We then tried another track, this time by Earth, Wind and Fire, which the track is Sing a Song, and the trumpets in that track, I mean, it's a great track and it's one you want to dance, you know, it gets you that kind of feel good. It's a really feel good track and I do like it anyway. But the trumpets in there, they just had that sort of tonal texture that gave them that sense of realism. So at this point, I'm starting to think these speakers are doing something pretty good. Definitely something very good. We then played Iron Hand, which is Dire Straits track, and Mark Knopfler's vocal was dead center, lots of body and texture into his vocal. The bass was very taut and punchy, which is how you would want it to be. And again, a good test track. It's quite atmospheric and it's got, you know, a very decent sound stage. We then played Paul Dermond Take 10 track, which is a jazz track. And of course, there's very much on the right-hand channel saxophone, and on the left-hand channel, you know, we had the guitar, and central to the sound stage was the percussion. And the one thing I noticed was that the cymbals were nice and crisp with the right amount of decay, which again just gives you this kind of natural atmosphere. So you really do get the sense of the recording, and that was great. So that was another good test track. But then tried Gail Buswell, which is much more rock and sort of blues rock, and the track's So Blue. And this has got a bit of pace and it can sound quite bright on some systems. There's an edginess to it. It's maybe not the best recording, but that's always a good thing, you know, to try with when you're testing some equipment. So again, it passed that test very well. We then moved on to Buena Vista Social Club and the Chan Chan track, which is hugely atmospheric. It's so, this track, I'll bring it up on screen, but it is a cavernous soundstage, the way this has been produced and recorded. And just the guitars, the vocals, you really got a true sense of the atmosphere of this track. So you can kind of tell I was really enjoying what these Atalante 4s were doing. And switching amplification was also very interesting. The AW300s just sounded phenomenal going through the Atalante 4s, and they should do it 20-odd thousand pounds for the pair. So bringing it back to a much more, I would say, price-related amplifier, the V40 SE, which costs a little bit more than the loudspeakers, therefore you would think is, in price terms, a much more of a sensible combination. And boy, did that combination really gel. The synergy between the V40 SE and the Atalante 4s was staggering. And I was pulling, you know, different members of our team through. I'd say, Andrew, come and have a listen to this, and Graham, come and have a listen to this. And you know, we were really all quite taken with how that combination worked. And this is a low-powered valve amplifier. This is not something high-powered. And that we weren't using any of the supporting black boxes that Octave provide to give you more dynamic headroom. And we played this pretty loud. I mean, I'm talking about loud enough that we, you know, standing 2 feet apart from each other, we couldn't actually hear what the person was saying. So we were playing it loud as we felt was comfortable, even beyond that, to the point where if you were listening, you would go and turn it down. It just was too loud. But the amplifier didn't lose composure, which means that the impedance load that it was being presented with, even at high volume and on some very testing tracks, there was no soundstage compression. We didn't hear any distortion even at high volume, which means that these are offering your amplifier a very stable load. And I have a feeling that whilst this amplifier worked great with solid state, it sounded great with the Musical Fidelity M8XI, which is a very high-powered solid-state amplifier. What I think is that if you've got a low-powered, pure Class A solid-state or a valve amplifier, these are going to give your amplifier some nice headroom that you're going to appreciate, because you're going to recognize that it's an expansive soundstage. There's no drawbacks with low power. So in terms of overall sound, I would class these as a probably slightly sweeter sound. And I use the word sweeter not in a negative way comparing to the other Atalante models, but they definitely have a smoother top end that I think some people will like. I think because of the very noticeably narrower front cabinet compared to the 5s, these will image, and they do image better. I think the soundstage is more holographic. Now that's taking nothing away from the 5s, because I've got a pair of these and they image really well. And particularly for a large, front baffle, which historically from my experience don't always image particularly well, these fly in the face of that and they do image exceptionally well. But the 4s take this to a new level. On the Gail Buswell rock track, blues track that I mentioned, her vocal was really high in the soundstage, which is, again, something very indicative of a very holographic loudspeaker. It wasn't dropped right down and making everything very much right across what you see in front of you. There was top to bottom, front to back, right to left, sound stage scale and dimension that, again, flies in the face of the price point of these loudspeakers. And that then brings me to what I think is the most important aspect of the sound performance, is the price. These perform exceptionally well, and I would say, based on my listening experience and that of our team, the feedback that we all shared and discussed is that they defy £3,800. They look much more expensive. I would say they sound much more expensive. In fact, we had a pair of loudspeakers that came as a trade-in from a customer. I'm not going to mention what they are, because I'm not one for knocking other brands, particularly if we don't deal with them. It can come across as a bit disingenuous. So, but trust me when I tell you, these retail about £9,800, and we switched them from those to the Atalante 4s, and everybody without exception preferred the Atalante 4 sound presentation. Now that was with the AW300M monos, and I actually personally preferred the octave sound overall, which was at £4,000 with those speakers, because this is where, and we speak about this often, component matching is such a key element to getting the best out of your hi-fi system, and synergy from one component to another is critical. I can recount numerous stories of clients we've dealt with who have bought individually very expensive components only to discover that they actually don't work well together, and you then end up with I've got a customer that spent £60,000 on a system and it didn't sound great at all because some of these components did not synergistically or symbiotically work. And this is where working with a dealer that can advise you as to what will work is such a crucial part. And I would say, whoever you deal with, try and buy as much of your system from that one dealer, so they are responsible for your journey, for each upgrade that you do. They should have the experience and the professional and technical knowledge to advise you correctly. And that's one thing that I know here at Elite Audio we pride ourselves upon. So in terms of overall sound quality, these are staggeringly good for the money, as succinctly as I can put it to you. There is nothing about the sound that I think is negative in terms of the cost. Yeah, of course there's better speakers out there, but they're going to cost you an awful lot more, and this is where it's relative. All reviews are very relative to the price you're paying, and in the context of a speaker that retails at under £4,000, honestly, these are as good a value for money loudspeaker that I know of from any manufacturer. So it's a very easy recommendation to recommend the Atalante 4s. I've got to thank Revival Audio for producing something so very good and I would say full sounding. It's a very full sounding loudspeaker. I think that's the thing we all commented on. It has warmth, but it fills out the sound in a really good way. Nothing bloated or rounded or, you know, where the bass can sound a bit lumpy and a bit slow. Everything keeps pace, high frequency, mid-range, and the mid-range is beautiful. It's very, very sweet and clear, and vocals just sound phenomenal. With the texture and a female vocal on these is very apparent. So these are a speaker you're going to be able to firstly integrate into your home setup. I think the aesthetics would work in most living rooms. I think the walnut finish, the pair that we have here, I think the veneer and the grain on these just looked exceptional. Just such a striking looking loudspeaker. And you know, the basses and the feet on these make the leveling of the speaker exceptionally easy. You know, once you've got the speaker set up, put a spirit level on top, adjust your feet in the bottom. It literally is a really quick process. One of the easiest that I've seen to use compared to others where you're fiddling about with taking caps off and Allen keys, and I can see there'll be a number of you nodding at your computer screen right now who have been there, and that can be quite a laborious process. Time well spent, and it's good to invest in getting your speakers set up. And yeah, so I think these, you know, should rightly and deservedly get one of our highest recommendations, another outstanding product award, simply because of the price performance ratio. If these were retailing at £6,800, I don't think anybody would question that price because of how they look and how they perform. Whether they're right for you, well, that's a different question. But this is where, again, as we will always do with speakers or any component that we rate as our outstanding product, award-based speaker, we will give you a 30-day money-back guarantee so you can try these at home. And I think if you get them at home, you will be reluctant to take them out again. That's my gut feel based on what I have heard and over the hours that I've spent listening to these over the last few weeks. So there we go, outstanding product award, great loudspeaker, easy to recommend, beautifully built, great sounding as I've said, and an incredible value for money. So as we move on to the last part of this video, as ever, I always have a favour to ask you here. If you're enjoying the content, if you like the products that we are including in our reviews, and we've got some really exciting products to come up. We're going to be reviewing the Musical Fidelity New Vista DAC, which has been getting some incredible press coverage recently, picking up awards right, left and centre. That is on our list to do, and we are hoping to have that review for you next week. So please stay tuned to see that. So yeah, so the favour is, if you're enjoying the content, and we're putting a lot of thought into the content we're producing for you, please subscribe to our channel. It takes a few seconds, one click and you're subscribed. I also appreciate those that like our videos. That is also something that we're grateful for, and we thank you very much for watching what we're producing. As I've said many times, we are a small team of audio professionals, and we genuinely are passionate about everything that we're involved in. We don't take on brands or products that haven't gone through a rigorous process of testing. If they don't pass that test, they don't get included. It's that simple. So naturally, when we are then bringing you the review of these products, we have put these through a very stringent testing process that is more real life. You know, it's about real life listening, real life music, how you would listen to music. People don't listen to music in, you know, specially tuned chambers that loudspeakers are designed in. It's about as far flung from a real living space as you can possibly get. So a real world test, which I listen at home, listen here in our showroom, it's about what is real and more relevant. So hopefully that then strikes more of a chord as you see how we put these reviews together. So if you can, please, takes a few seconds. If you subscribe to our channel, I will be very grateful, and thank you to those who have done so already. That is also appreciated. So finally, please have a great week listening to music. As I said before, and I've said on many occasions, It is one of the best ways to relax and spend your free time. Until next week's video, please take care and thank you for watching this week.